As you know, it's our tradition here always to begin every event with a very brief prayer, and I'm going to do that now. Heavenly Father, we pray for your blessing upon this place, which is marked by so many years of music making and worship of the praises of God in music. Pray for your blessing upon this place and upon this ministry today, remembering with thanksgiving the extraordinary achievement of Bernstein, his coming birthday and all that he has achieved. So I'm very delighted to welcome Tommy Pearson and Humphrey Burton.
Good evening, good evening. Thank you for that greeting.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is such a pleasure to be here.
Tommy, I've got one thing to say before I sit down.
Already.
Can people see us if we're sitting down? Would it be better if we stood up?
No, let's sit down, Humphrey, because
right.
they've got us behind on the screen as well.
Okie doke. Oh, yes, of course.
So everything's fine.
Sorry to worry, ladies and gentlemen. Once a producer, always a producer.
Indeed. Such a pleasure to be here, this wonderful setting, which of course is where the film we are going to be watching tonight was filmed. And it's a really special kind of film that we're going to see tonight, conducted of course by Leonard Bernstein, today being the eve of his 100th birthday. And there have of course been so many celebrations through the year to mark that special occasion. I think this is a particularly special one tonight because not only obviously do we see this amazing film with Bernstein conducting the London Symphony Orchestra, but we also, of course, have Humphrey Burton here, who directed it and had such a long, fruitful collaboration and friendship with Leonard Bernstein. Humphrey, I wanted to start, rather than talking specifically about the film in the first instance, I wanted to talk about Bernstein's relationship with the music of Mahler. Mahler now is everywhere, in concert halls all over the world. And it's actually easy, I think, to forget that wasn't the case when Bernstein was growing up and when he first started to emerge as a conductor.
Oh, you're absolutely right. It wasn't the case when I was growing up either. I was at university in Cambridge just after 51, 54. I never heard a note of Gustav Mahler. He was not part of the classical music scene. And a number of conductors, Bruno Walter, Jascha Horenstein, and Bernstein himself, were determined to bring Mahler. I think Bernstein had the slogan, Mahler's time has come. And when he became music director of the New York Philharmonic in 1958, he said, I'm going to do a Mahler cycle. He postponed it until 60, which was the centenary of Mahler's birth. But then over the 60s, with the New York Philharmonic, he filmed Mahler symphonies, except the number 8, which he filmed in London with the LSO chorus and other choruses. And then, if I may go straight on to how I got involved with Leonard Bernstein, I remember when the cycle was recorded by CBS and the New York Philharmonic, the manager of CBS gave me a lovely black shiny box with a medallion of Mahler on the back and said, here, this is a present. I said, why do you want to give these for me? I have no interest in Gustav Mahler. He's a second-rate composer, I probably said, to my shame. And then, of course, a few years later, Leonard Bernstein's management asked me if I would like to work regularly every year with Bernstein for a German company called Unitel, who, in their wisdom, had decided they would hire Leonard Bernstein to film and perform the Vienna Philharmonic Orchestra, it was, to film all Mahler's symphonies for video cassette, and for as well as for television. And I didn't need to be encouraged to say yes. I said yes immediately, and that's how I came to be making Mahler films with Leonard Bernstein. But why, if it's Vienna Philharmonic and basically a European Munich company, why on earth are we here in Ely Cathedral? That was a private war between Bernstein's management and the Vienna Philharmonic. And Bernstein wanted to prove that, through his manager, that he was in charge. And he said, I want to do this in Ely. Why should he want to do it in Ely? Next question. I'm sorry, I'm not taking you. You tell me why he wanted
I'll
to
ask
do
some questions at some point.
You tell me why he wanted to do it in Ely.
Well, let's go back a little bit, because we must remember this concert with the London Symphony Orchestra, Bernstein conducting, was done at the Edinburgh. It was really designed for the Edinburgh Festival first of all, wasn't it? Where they did it first of all.
Leonard Bernstein had such a Mephistophelian manager. I can't confirm that. It could well be that they decided to do it at Edinburgh so that they could then do it on film in Ely. That's the way Bernstein worked. And there was this row, which is why Bernstein and his manager said, well, we're going to do 1973, our Mahler will be done not with the Vienna Philharmonic, but thank goodness, as it turned out, with the London Symphony, which Lenny had already done Mahler 8 for them a few years earlier.
But he studied this building at Harvard, didn't he?
That is what's so marvelous. That's why he said, I want for the Mahler 2, the Resurrection Symphony, by its very title, Auferstehung, Resurrection. It clearly has a very strong spiritual quality. In the end, it's not particularly specifically Christian, except that it states the belief that we will be born again, that we'll be renewed, we will return. And that's the whole message of the last movement. It's wonderful and very, very moving indeed. But Bernstein was a well-read student. He'd read a conventional school in Latin, but the Boston Latin School in Boston, and then he'd gone on to Harvard, where he majored in music, but he read French and politics and aesthetics. And one of the aesthetics courses was about Ely Cathedral. So that when he wanted to have a really beautiful space for this beautiful piece, he said, I want to do it in Ely. And as I've said in my book, Leonard Bernstein had a whim of iron. And if he wanted to do something, it usually happened. And that's why we came here. It wasn't easy, but it was a logistical nightmare, in fact. But it was.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you, because when we watch it, it all seems perfectly natural. And we see the piece unfold, and we see the performance and everything. But actually getting them all in there, and the logistics of actually filming, it was actually a very expensive and huge project to take on.
Yeah, this German company made its money by versioning in German Hollywood movies. It was a very successful and rich company, and its boss, Leo Kirsch, was a music lover. And he decided he'd spend some of his profits on this very noble cause, and that he'd make films, not videotapes, but films. Videotape, if you've got cassettes, ladies and gentlemen, at home, they're in the garage or they're in the attic, because you don't use, and if you look at them, they've got white powder all over them. Tape does not last. 35 millimeter film, particularly when it's kept in proper storage conditions, will last forever. And these films look as fresh today as they did when they were being filmed. We started in 1971 with Mahler 9, and we finished in 1976 with Mahler 8. They look as good as they ever did. What was your question? I think I've answered it.
I think you've answered that, and the other three that I was about to ask as well. Now, again, when we watch the film, of course, it's just the concert, but it doesn't reveal, of course, all the issues that you had in actually making it, because here we are in a cathedral in 1973, which was also at the height of the troubles in Ireland. That came into play, didn't it? And then you also had various technical issues as well. Why don't you explain those?
The most obvious, well, it was what they now call logistical problem, because to get 150 members of the Edinburgh Festival Chorus, who, by the way, learnt their music by heart, as you'll see, which was unusual in those days, so that they sing with tremendous passion and conviction. 150 members of the chorus, about 100 of the orchestra, because as well as a very large orchestra, with I think 7 horns and 3 or 4 more offstage, and a large offstage brass band, that's for the last movement. I think it should be called the Apocalypse Now Symphony, because that's what the last movement is. It's an apocalypse. It's fantastic. But so that the problem of getting everybody down here, and where they were going to stay. I think the orchestra actually came up and went back to London each time. The choir stayed in the train. I think they had a special train with sleepers. I'm not sure how it worked. My job was to write the script and get the cameras in the right place. But unfortunately, just in front here where we're sitting now, we had a big crane camera. It hadn't been used for some years before, but I was ambitious to get the kind of swooping shots that you get with a crane. And lo and behold, in the rehearsal, it fell apart. It literally collapsed, toppled over. So that was a pretty serious problem. We got it sorted. But then we had equally serious problems, not of our making. A telephone call, there's been a bomb planted in the cathedral. Well, that in those days you had to take them seriously. So the whole cathedral had to be evacuated. And then there's one other problem we had, which was actually during the recordings, and that is the bats. Those of you who live around here will know that the bats of Ely are very, very audible, and they fly around up in the octagon, and you could hear them. When the music was quiet, you could hear the bats squawking around. So that was another problem. I don't think we got a bat remover. I don't know how we got rid of the bats. But anyway, you won't hear any bats on the soundtrack, which is a wonderful soundtrack, by the way. And these, I have to congratulate the producer, Tim Burton, because this equipment, the screen, and the loudspeakers, for me, and you, Tommy, you know this world as well, very well, the quality of sound that has been made here. Somebody said, well, how are you going to make the sound like you're in a cathedral? Well, just listen, ladies and gentlemen. It sounds as if we're in a cathedral. It's wonderful.
And one of the extraordinary things in that sound is the sound of this orchestra. This is a Rolls-Royce orchestra. It's an incredible lineup. And I mean, when I was growing up and I was a student of music, these names that are in the orchestra, I mean, anybody who studied music, I think, will know these names of the people that were in the orchestra. I mean, people like Dougie Cummings on cello, Roger Lord and Anthony Camden on oboe, Jack Brymer, the great clarinetist, Harold Snell and Bill Lang on trumpets, Dennis Wick and Eric Kreis on trombone, all these legendary names, John Fletcher on tuba, Kurt Hans Gerdeker on timpani.
Sidney Goossens.
Also, 3 members of the orchestra on the film are here today as well. I should mention them. We've got Francis Saunders on cello and the bassoonist Roger Bernstein and Bob Borton. Feel for them because they'll be watching themselves 45 years ago. Except, of course, you'll all recognize them afterwards because none of them have changed a bit. But anyway, I think it'll be an amazing experience for them to see themselves up on here. But anyway, this orchestra at this particular point was one of my favorite lineups, if you like, of this orchestra. Yes. But this was Andre Previn's orchestra at this point, wasn't it? Andre Previn was the principal conductor of the orchestra at the time. And all these stars.
And he and Bernstein were very good friends and had worked together a great deal. But I don't think Andre would have wanted to tackle a work like this. It wasn't not in his comfort zone in the way it was part of Bernstein's makeup. I want to say that I know Bob Borton even longer than the LSO days, because when I was a young man, I managed something called the British Students' Orchestra. I took an orchestra of over teenagers. They were young people in their 20s. We went to Vienna, and the bassoon was Bob Borton, so we've been around. And what a lot of trouble you gave me, Mr. Borton.
Well, you could take that up with him afterwards.
Yes, but before I forget, I'll be signing books if anybody wants to buy them, but I'll also be happy to talk to anybody who passes by on the way out down there at the far end.
I was going to come on to the sound that the orchestra makes, because actually it's one of those pieces, of course, that runs every single possible emotion and technique really across the orchestra. But here, one of the things that really strikes me about it is not just this performance. It's not just the lyrical side of the orchestra, the beauty of the playing, but also the attack. Sometimes the violence of the attack, particularly in the strings, which is a sound I don't think you hear very often now in orchestras, but you certainly hear it, particularly in the first movement with the first. Exactly. And when it comes back in the middle of the first movement, it really makes it. And I genuinely have never heard it played like that.
Well, they were led by what was his name, the leader.
Well, it's John Giorgio's normally.
No, it wasn't John Giorgio, and it wasn't Hugh. Hugh Bean is not even the leader, but Hugh Bean's on the front desk. I know him perfectly. The name will come back in a minute. John Barker maybe, but it doesn't matter. They were led by very fine players, and the orchestra, as you say, was at nearly always at its peak. The LSO. It's astonishing the way it reborn. But this work is, even amongst Mahler's works, this is exceptional in the forces that are used. I think because there's a very important off-stage band, as I mentioned already, brass in the last movement. There's 3 or 4 horns who only play off-stage, but I think there's 7 horns on stage, and there are 4 of flutes and 4 of oboes and clarinets. So Jack Brymer among the clarinets, astonishing. There he is, normally associated with the Royal Philharmonic, but here he was in the LSO. And the string sound, you're right. It's not only in the lyrical sections, but also, for example, in the second movement, he's got that marvelous lilt they get for Bernstein, the Ländler movement. It's got such a schwung to it. It's so charming. And then the sort of satire of the next movement, the St. Anthony preaching to the fishes. Mahler turned a song into a whole symphonic movement very powerfully. It's marvelous. We haven't even started to talk about the singers yet.
Well, I was just about to mention Sheila Armstrong and Janet Baker. You can talk about what it was like to work with those two, but for me, one of the most heart-stopping moments in this film is when Janet Baker sings in the fourth movement, the O Russian Rot, which is an extraordinary moment. She has that stillness in her performance that she always had, that amazing command, didn't she?
You see the soloists coming on at the beginning, and then you don't see them again until they're needed because they're going to sing. That's one of the joys. Although the filming was done at a live concert, perhaps we could just ask Tommy, was anybody here 45 years ago at the performance? How wonderful. Well, we can chat about it maybe afterwards. But I don't know how I did it, but when I needed it, the choir was there. But it wasn't there for the first 3-4 movements. And then suddenly, when after the tumult of what's called the grosse appel, the final judgment call, and suddenly you hear what I think are the soul flutterings trying to find new life. And it all dies down to absolute nothing. And then, lo and behold, when you need it, the choir is there. That's one of the joys of making films. But it wasn't so easy at the time, I can tell you that. But I suppose my job as a director was to write the storyboard. In a sense, you write a film script in your head of what you want to look at any given time. Of course, most of the time you want to look at the conductor because he is, in the case of Leonard Bernstein, so fantastically expressive.
Well, I wanted to ask you about this because this is something in all of your Bernstein films. And one of the things that I love about your direction, and we very rarely see now, and it may be a reflection of some of the conductors also, but I think, I can't remember who it was who said it, but it's something like that when Bernstein conducts Mahler, it's as if the piece is being written as he's conducting it. It's that freshness about his approach. But he had such an extraordinarily expressive face. But you stay on him. And actually, I think it's one of the things, if you're used to watching the way in which concerts are directed now, it's quite startling to see sometimes how long you stay on a shot, and particularly with Bernstein himself.
Technology has got ahead, I think, of musicality, where the shooting of orchestras. We watch it when you watch the proms. They've got so many cameras at their disposal that they're so much cheaper than they used to be. And if you're editing, you can fiddle around. The director becomes the editor and can go on tinkering with it. And it becomes much fussier. And I think in my day, well, as I told you, I was hired to direct the whole series on video, and that was because of an educational desire as much as an entertainment desire. Bernstein and his management and Leo Kirsch in Munich both wanted to have this preserved forever so that it could be studied in music colleges by music lovers for generations to come, and thank goodness that has happened. Bernstein never told me what to photograph. I used to go and have little sessions, not little, quite long sessions, as if I was a conducting student, so that he would tell me what he thought was interesting and important to see at any given point. But I knew that what was most important to see was him, because virtually every bar is a slightly different tempo. He's constantly not pulling it around in a vulgar way, but he's responding to the ebb and flow of the music in a way which I think very few conductors can equal. And his body language, it's not just his expression on his face, his whole body is sensational.
In your book, you describe this performance as it had an epic power that Bernstein never surpassed. Why do you think that is?
Well, Bernstein was certainly in the 1970s at the peak of his physical condition. He wasn't yet suffering badly from the emphysema and later the cancer, which finally killed him when he was only 72. He was at the peak, top of his game, as I say. And also he was responding to a work which has been voted by, I think, 100 conductors as one of the 5 greatest symphonies ever composed. So it was the right time at the right place with the right music. I think that's probably why it remains. And although I did nearly 200 films of different musical works with Bernstein, I don't think that anything has ever quite got me to the guts of the way that this does. 200
films with him, a long career with him, and also, of course, official biographer, as you mentioned, the book earlier. What, in this year where everybody's been celebrating Bernstein, not just as a conductor, of course, but also as a composer and as educator and communicator in music, what is left with your greatest memory of him, perhaps in work, but also personally?
It's awfully hard I have so many vivid memories of him. My wife was here too at that time in 1973.
And it's your wedding anniversary today.
It's our wedding anniversary. That's a different year, but we didn't actually get that. Thank you. Thank you very much. And I think that although the balletic fury of something like The Rite of Spring, or indeed the vivid, violent movements in this, the tenderness that you'll see in the second movement, for example, and then the way he can combine undoubted ecstasy. It was he himself who said, I can't conduct it well unless I feel I'm composing it on the spot. That was one of his own thoughts about conducting. But it's ecstasy combined with total command of the material, and if he knows that the double basses need a cue for something, even if his arms outstretched, he'll still be able to be in charge. So he's got an ice-cold brain, and he's got a volcanic brain in the same body. In that skin of his, there were 4 or 5 great musicians. One was a pianist, another a conductor, another an educator, one a pundit, and a composer, of course, almost above all else. And he saw himself as a Jekyll and Hyde. And I've got to decide whether I'm going to be a conductor or a composer. Of course, he never decided, because he was both. And he was absolutely, irredeemably both. And I think now, after, as we celebrate the 100th birthday, we're celebrating so many things. We're celebrating his passion, but also his desire to be an educator, to pass on what he loved, his inquisitiveness. He was always looking for new things and exploring things, how it worked. When he was young, he used to take clocks to pieces to see how they worked. I'm not giving you a very good answer because I can't actually sum it up in a few words, my love for Leonard Bernstein, but it is certainly there. And I think that he attracts so many different people, different walks of life, because Broadway is as important to him, or was for many years, as Carnegie Hall and Ely Cathedral. And he loved conducting students as much as he loved conducting the London Symphony Orchestra.
Before we finish, I want to mention 2 other people who were involved in this recording who are also here that I didn't mention earlier. One, the stage manager of this building, Ely Cathedral, Graham Austin, who was the stage manager in 1973 and is still the stage manager now. He's here.
Is he here? Can we stand him up?
Hello, Graham.
Well,
he might be managing the stage somewhere.
There he is.
But
anyway, bravo.
There he is. And welcome, Graham.
Fantastic.
And also the script and camera assistant on the film, one Jonathan Burton, your brother, who's also
brother.
Here. So
yes,
hello to you.
Thank you, Jonathan.
It is an extraordinary piece of work, this film, in all regards: the performance, the filming itself, the direction, and of course the work at its centre. So I really hope you enjoy it. Those of you that hold on, Humphrey. Those of you that were here the first time, I hope you enjoy it again. Did you want to say something?
I just want to say one thing. There's a lovely article by Clive Gillinson, who was then 4th desk of the cellos. You'll see him on the outside, number 7 in the orchestra. He rose to be the managing director of the orchestra, later went to Carnegie Hall, and he's written the most beautiful piece about Lenny in your program note. But also, I do recommend, in the few minutes before the music starts, those of you who can have the eyesight to cope with it, read the text, because the texts of what Janet sings, Dame Janet, in the fourth movement, and the text of what she and Sheila Armstrong and the chorus sing, and know that Mahler himself wrote most of the poem that is sung in the last. It's very moving. And with that, I want to thank once again Tim Burton and Tommy for looking after me. Thank you
And
very
we're
much.
going to have a couple of minutes comfort break now before we start the film. And then we'll look forward to meeting you if you can stay behind afterwards. But for now, will you please say thank you to the wonderful Humphrey Burton.